Well, I'm lucky enough here today to have Taha join us after 5 years. You know, as a teacher, it's always really weird. Students leave the junior high and then they just kind of disappear. And we have Karen back there. Hello, Karen. Thank you. And I thought it would be fun. Taha, you've done so many amazing things with the Acceptance Project, the whole group. I know it's not just you.
100%.
But it's been 5 years since it started here as an eighth grader. You're 5 years older. You're had 5 more years of life, and I thought it'd be neat to sit down and talk about some things because, as we know, Stroudsburg in general is going through some diversity issues. So, I want to start way back at the beginning, if you can remember. What was your original impetus or motivation for starting TAP?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was actually TAP was born out of the wrong reasons, and I can say that because I think after the 2016 election, I was just upset. So I was like, how can I get as many like-minded students as possible in the same group so we could talk about the same things we disliked? And then I realized that was like super unfulfilling. As TAP has started to grow, and I've started to recognize that we're really not making a dent or any sort of progress in the conversations that we're having, whether they be on race, identity, religion, politics, you name it. The only benefit we could possibly have from these conversations is if we're talking with somebody we disagree with. And that, further added on to the idea is that, none of us are experts in any of these issues, right? We're not, employees at big think tanks. We don't have poli-sci degrees. So I was asking myself, like, what really value is there for us to be talking about these, major social and geopolitical issues? And what I started to recognize, and that really came into developing TAP's mission statement, is facilitating civil discourse in American high schools in order to create a new generation of empathetic leaders, creative thinkers, and active listeners. So the goal of our conversations isn't to come up with solutions or to make legislation. It's really to train students on how do you respectfully disagree, because that's something that's always going to exist, and students need to be prepared on how to do it.
It's a fantastic goal, and it's much needed, not just from students, but across the board. Now, 5 years later, is TAP what you thought it would be?
Am I happy with what it is now? Yes. Is it what I thought it would be? Not at all. From going from a club to a franchise is like a whole different ballgame. So we have to figure out, like, who are we? Who are we as TAP? And because of that, we're starting to figure out, like, okay, how do we develop ourselves from an organizational standpoint? So before we were just a club and a bunch of students figuring out what we're doing. Now we're trying to figure out how do we take that to the next level. And from going from that to this is like a huge jump. So there's a lot of things to figure out. So I never thought that we would be starting a summer camp to help start other TAP chapters. We've recently started a new focus group initiative. So the idea is that we've partnered up with East Stroudsburg University, and we're hiring individuals from their Diversity Dialogue project.
Wow.
So the idea is that you can have young enough facilitators that still have a youth aspect to them, but also have a semi-professional background in facilitation to help facilitate focus groups at the high school on race and racial identity. We've also developed certain metrics to measure our success because before, we were just like talking, but now we're seeing like, okay, like what type of qualitative data can we gather from this? So how do we measure like critical thinking, empathy, confidence? And the hope is that we can use all of this data and use all of this impact and really help drive forward a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that exist at the administrative and school board level. Because we've been working really closely with school board members and administration. So the idea is that we're working on the ground right now. Our feet are on the ground. So how can we do the best to kind of lift it all up?
Absolutely. And as TAP has grown, you guys have grown 5 years. 5 years from 13 and 14 to 18 and 19 is a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about a quarter of your life. How do you think that has influenced your group as a whole, TAP the organization?
I don't know if I would like me 5 years ago. I'm going to be honest with her.
I don't know if anybody likes themselves 5 years ago.
I think a lot of it has just really become I think the biggest lesson I've learned is just probably humility. Because I think you're right, is that a lot of the times, like a lot of leadership can be very lonely because it feels like you're on this boat, and sometimes it feels like that boat is sinking and you're the only one on it. But what I've realized is that you always have people behind you. Like whether that be your parents or friends, and whether it's indirect or direct, it doesn't really matter. You always have people behind you. And I think recognizing that when you're in this space, it can also be very intimidating because all of a sudden you're like, rubbing shoulders with like, individuals that are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for like, kids in Somalia, and like building homeless shelters for like people in Kentucky, and you're just like what am I doing here? And I think a big lesson that I'm trying to learn is that this civil discourse space is really, really vast, and it has a lot of great resources. So stop trying to invent the wheel, and inventing something new. And let's see what exists out there, and let's really focus on collaboration. I think that requires a lot of humility. So it's definitely a process I'm still working on, but hopefully it carries on.
No, 100%. I always think about, how important time and reflection and listening, that word listening keeps coming up over and over and over again. And just life are so important to growth. So one of the last questions I want to ask you here is, as you reflect over your time in Stroudsburg as a student, with TAP, with life, how has it changed you?
I definitely have a lot more facial hair.
Well,
so I don't know if that played a role at all.
That's,
But I think on a more personal level, it's made everything so much more complex. And I think before I would have considered myself an activist, hands down. But I think as you sort of dive into civil discourse, it becomes more and more difficult to call yourself an activist about anything, because everything starts becoming so much more nuanced. And that's kind of been a difficult thing to grapple with, because I think an activist identity is a really cool identity to hold on to, because it gives you a sense of direction. And when you don't have that, it becomes it's just a lot more difficult to care about certain things, because you're just like, oh no, like now I have to care about all parts of this certain thing, right? So I think just as an individual, being patient, and I think that's definitely that I'm trying to incorporate in my daily life, is that I think it's very easy to engage in civil discourse with people that like you don't know for a very long time, right?
Sure.
So like if I sat down with somebody that had completely diametrically opposed beliefs and values than me, and they were a total stranger, I think I would have a pretty easy time getting into a conversation with them. It becomes challenging when it's somebody like and love.
Yes.
Right? So I think that's really the challenge, and I think figuring out like, okay, like this civil discourse stuff that's happening in TAP, I'm good at it, and taking it back into my own personal life and my own family and my own friends, that's really like putting my money where my mouth is. So it's definitely a challenge. I don't think I'm perfect at it whatsoever, but figuring out the value of the TAP conversations in my personal life, I think really has a potential to transform my future.
That's all right. They need to be, those conversations that need to be had, which again takes us right back to the beginning of TAP. Last question, maybe. If you were starting TAP today with what you know now, would it look the same?
Not at all. Not at all. Not in the slightest whatsoever. I went into TAP with this philosophy that like I'm like the most accepting that there is, right? Like how can it be I'm the pinnacle, right? And then I started like again like the idea is that when you start taking TAP conversations and putting them into your personal life, you're just like, wow, like maybe I'm not as tolerant as I thought. And that was like a huge wake up call. And it's actually kind of disappointing, because you're just like, I'm supposed to be this accepting guy that accepts everything. And so taking that back into like, if I were to like flash back to what I know today, I think I wish I could, because it would just give me a lot more time. I'm taking a gap year actually, to focus more and like growing TAP from the organizational level.
Nice.
But I think it takes a lot of time to figure out like what you're doing and what your purpose is. So I know I can kind of feel like, wow, only if I knew this sooner. All the things that have happened at TAP right now is a large part because of you, and just the fact that we started out, and I can't thank the people that were with me from the very beginning. Ayodeji, Gio, Lloyd, Karen, Kate. It's all just really like a pyramid, and it's built on top of itself. It's built on all of these things. So for everybody that's been with TAP or still with TAP, really, really thank you. We're continuing to grind on to try to do a lot of the good work that we're doing. So hopefully we keep rocking and rolling.
Yeah, you've always given me way too much credit. All the credit goes to you and the kids that started it and have continued with it. So congratulations on everything that's happened. Success and continued success.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Herb.
Absolutely.